connection. There are subtitles available on the YouTube broadcast. These are generated by YouTube. The Council is not responsible for these subtitles nor their accuracy. There is a delay between the meeting and the YouTube broadcast of approximately 30 seconds. Webcasting officer, please can you commence the broadcast and confirm, please?
Oh yes, the broadcast has started.
Thank you. Good evening and welcome to this meeting of the Planning Committee on Tuesday the 13th of April 2021. Before we commence with this proceedings this evening, I can confirm that the Council has adopted some basic etiquette rules for its remote meetings, and these are as follows. Please only speak when the Chairman invites you to do so. Members, please let the Chairman know that you wish to speak through the chat function. The Chairman will introduce speakers in the order at which the request to speak has been made, unless there is a point of order at which we will give way. Please minimise all distractions while you are in the meeting. Members are asked to mute your microphones where you are not speaking and to consider turning off your video to reduce any interference to your audio feed. Please bear in mind that there may be a lag between the speakers and other attendees hearing you. Presentations and images will be visible on the screen this evening, and these will be shared by the lead officers through the shared screen function. If you have any difficulties in viewing these presentations, please let me know through the chat function. When referring to the officer's report, please quote the relevant page and paragraph number to enable your colleagues to follow you. There is no private business for tonight's meeting. However, please can I remind members that when dealing with private business items, it is your responsibility to make sure that your venue and connection is private. If you lose connection at any point at the meeting, please rejoin the meeting and I'd readmit you. Contact details have been provided should this problem persist. Please only use the chat function for the purpose prescribed of requesting to speak or for a point of order. The chat function is subject to the access to information regimes of FOI, EIR. It is also subject to data protection, rules of defamation and the Council's Code of Conduct. To assist with managing the chat function for this meeting, the agenda items will be placed in the chat function to act as markers. I can confirm that the meeting is quorate and can proceed. The Planning Committee consists of the following members. The Chairman is Councillor Wendy Scattergood, Vice Chairman is Councillor Eleanor Parker. The remaining members of the committee are James Abbott, Kevin Bowers, Tom Cunningham, Patrick Horner, Hilton Johnson, David Mann, Andy Mundy, Frankie Ritchie, Gabrielle Spray, Nick Unsworth and Justin Wrench. Chairman, for this evening we have received apologies from 4 members. These include Councillor James Abbott, Councillor Tom Cunningham, Councillor Andy Mundy and Councillor Nick Unsworth. There are officers in attendance for these meetings, and these include Lisa Page, Senior Planner, Natalie Banks, Senior Planner, Andrew Martin, Senior Planner, Chris Paggi, Planning Development Manager. Alison Webb is the Governance Officer who's clerking this meeting and will also read public question time statements in the event we do not have them in attendance. My name is Emma Wisby and I am the meeting facilitator. To distinguish councillors and officers on the broadcast, officers have a prefix of officer, councillor have a prefix of CLLR, the abbreviation for councillor. Registered public question time speakers have a prefix of PQT before their name. I will now hand over to the Chairman, Councillor Wendy Scattergood, for this meeting. Chairman, before I do so, please could I have your permission just to admit Mr. Rob Marshall-Farley to the meeting to check his connection. He is a registered speaker. If I may, Chairman, thank you.
Certainly, Emma. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Marshall-Farley. My name's Emma Wisby. I'm the meeting facilitator for this meeting of the Planning Committee. Just to let you know, we are currently in a live broadcast, which is being transmitted on the Council's YouTube channel. You are the registered speaker for agenda item, apologies, Chairman, for the Whittam 95 Newland Street Whittam application, which is the 3rd application on the agenda. Could I ask you to unmute your microphone so we can test your connection to this meeting, and then I will place you into a virtual waiting room where we'll hold you until we come to that business item.
Okay, yeah, does it work?
It is, that's lovely, thank you, Mr. Marshall. Also, can I also just clarify, you've had contact with my colleague Alison Webb regarding your public question time statement, which has been circulated to members. You are aware that your public question time statement needs to be able to be read within the 3 minutes allocated.
I'm working on it at the moment just to try and summarise it, so yes. Yeah,
okay.
I'm aware of that.
Thank you very much. So I'm now going to place you into a virtual waiting room, and you will be brought forward at the appropriate time for that agenda item, and I will send you messages through the chat function. Is that okay?
Yeah. Did you say I'm 3rd on the agenda?
It's the third item on the agenda. Yes, please.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you. So I'm now going to place you into the waiting room. Thank you very much, Chairman, for your permission to resolve that matter of our outstanding public question time speaker. I now hand over you to formally open the meeting. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Emma, and good evening, members. Members, I would like to start this meeting with a tribute to His Royal Highness Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. On Friday, the 9th of April, we heard the sad news of the passing of His Royal Highness, the Duke of Edinburgh. Braintree District Council, through our chairman, has written to Her Majesty the Queen to pass on the condolences of the people of our district. And I would like to begin this meeting with a moment of reflection to commemorate a life of exceptional duty to our country. Members, please would you join me in marking this moment of reflection? Thank you. Thank you, members. Thank you. We'll now commence the business of this evening. The first item is item 1, apologies for absence. I have apologies for absence from Councillors Cunningham, Abbott, Monday and Unsworth. Everyone else is here, thank you. Item 2, declarations of interest. Does any member wish to declare the existence and nature of any disclosable pecuniary interest, other pecuniary interest or non-pecuniary interest relating to items on the agenda, having regard to the code of conduct for members? Members, I will do a joint declaration on behalf of us all, as Mark Jackson is speaking and he is a previous member of our planning staff. I also have an NPI on item, sorry, I'm lost it. On item 5E, Mr. Smith is speaking, Councillor Mr. Smith is speaking. He's the chairman of the parish council and it's in my ward. So obviously I do know him, but I have not had any contact with anyone on this application. Councillor Mann.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. An MPI on the first item on the agenda, Church Lane. This site has been in my ward from time to time. I keep moving the boundaries. Therefore, a number of the objectors are known to me, but I haven't discussed this item with any of them at this time, and therefore I will stay and vote.
Thank you, Councillor Mann. Councillor Mrs. Spray.
Thank you, Chairman. I will declare an NPI in items 5G and 5H, Ovington Hall, Church Lane, Ovington. The applicant is known to me, but I had no prior notice of this application, haven't discussed it, so I will remain and vote. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Mrs. Spray. I have no one else indicating they wish to declare an interest. Oh, Councillor Mrs. Parker, sorry. Councillor Mrs. Parker.
Yes, Madam Chairman, I also should declare an interest on this item. The applicant, this is in my ward, the applicant has contacted me about this application and the previous similar related application. I have not expressed a view, but you will see that I have did call this application in. So I just wanted to make that clear. Thank you. I will remain and vote.
Thank you, Councillor Parker. I'd just like to clarify, as you said, this item that you are referring to Ovington Hall, Church Lane, Ovington.
That's correct, Madam Chairman. In fact, both of those items.
Right. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. That brings us to the end of declarations of interest. We now go on to item 3, minutes of previous meeting. Members, I have the minutes of the 30th of March. If it's a true wish that you would agree that these are a true item, I would ask for a mover and seconder, and I will then take silence as approval.
I'll move them as the correct record, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Mann. Did I find a seconder?
Yeah, yes, Chairman, Councillor Mrs. Spray, I'll second.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs. Spray. Members, it has been moved and seconded that these are a true record of the meeting. I will take silence as your approval. Thank you, members. That item, those minutes have been approved. We come on to item 4, public question time. We have no general questions this evening. Speakers are speaking prior to each application. We now come on to item 5, planning applications. Members, we do have 3 items in Part B, which could be determined en bloc without debate, but I need someone to mention whether they wish to do so or would like to move this.
I'm happy to move, Chairman. 5G and 5H are interesting items, but I think the recommendation is not controversial, and the silver end item is a bit different from the usual windows, but I think the same principles apply, and that the conclusion there is inevitable. So happy to move them on block, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Mann. Does that find a seconder before I move on?
Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Well, it has been moved and seconded, members, that we move these 3 items on block. That's 5G, that's application 1902092HH, Ovington Hall, Church Lane, Ovington. 5H, application 1902093 LBC, Ovington Hall, Church Lane, Overton. I'm sorry, Overton. And 5E, application 20017737HH, 52 Valentine Way, Silver End. All these applications are for granting. I will put that to the vote, and I do a normal vote on this. These are for the 3 to be on blocked for approval. Councillor Bowers.
For.
Councillor Horner. Councillor Horner, you're muted.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson.
For.
Councillor Mann.
For.
Councillor Mrs. Parker.
For.
Councillor Ritchie.
For.
Councillor Mrs. Spray.
For.
Councillor Wrench.
For.
Thank you, members. Those 3 items in Part B have been moved on block, all for approval. We now come back to Part A, and the first application in Part A is 5A, which is application 19-02207 full, land adjacent to Fair Acres 76 Church Lane, Braintree. We do not have any speakers on this application, so we go straight to the presentation, which is going to be made by Lisa. Good evening, Lisa. Thank you.
Thank you.
Make your presentation. Thank
Lovely.
you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you. This application is a full planning application relating to the erection of 14 residential dwellings on land adjacent to Fair Acres, 76 Church Lane in Braintree. The application is being reported to committee in accordance with the council's transitionary arrangements for the scheme of delegation and at the request of the chairman and vice chairman. So looking at the location plan here, it's located on Church Lane en route to Bocking from Braintree. It's sited opposite the entrance here to Bowlins Avenue and north of Braintree College. The site is located outside of the designated settlement boundary, but does abut it. The site is also outside of the conservation area. However, Church Lane is a key route into the conservation area and has a generally historic street scene. Turning to the existing site plan, this shows the existing trees and hedges at the site. To the rear of the site here is flood zone 2 and the River Blackwater. The site is considered to currently provide a positive contribution to the character and appearance of the street scene at Church Lane due to the presence of landscape views across the site towards the river and due to these protected trees on the site. Turning to the proposed site plan here. It proposes, as we know, the erection of 14 dwellings, so there'll be 8 along the frontage with Church Lane, so 3 in these 2 blocks and 2 detached dwellings, and then 6 detached dwellings lying within the rear of the site facing this internal access road. Here is the singular vehicular access into the site, sort of located towards the southern end of the site, and 4 of these units would be affordable. Now, the 4 units would be within this block here and one of the ones in this block of 3. Turning to the elevation, so this is plot 1 and 2, which are these detached units here that front onto Church Lane. These dwellings would be 8 metres in terms of height and would be finished in painted rendered with a brick plinth and a tile roof. In terms of floor plan, they're 4 bedrooms. Internal floor area of 150 square metres, which is in excess of that required by the Nationally Described Space Standards, or NDSS. Plot 3 and 4 are these two detached, where my cursor is hovering, these two detached units here to the south that face onto the internal access road. They're also 8 metres in height, finished in painted render, brick plinth and a clay tile roof. In terms of floor plan, very similar to those units 1 and 2, also 4-bedroom with a floor area 150 square metres. You can see here that the units are provided with an attached garage. Moving around now to plots 5 and 6, these are sort of to the eastern end, located towards that flood zone we know, which is sort of located to the east. These are 2-storey again, finished in brickwork with a clay tile roof, also 8 metres in height. And in terms of floor area, we can see here that they're 4-bedroom, similar in terms of floor area of 150 square metres. So turning to plots 7 and 8, these are the detached units to the north of the site, that's sort of fronting again onto this access road. They are along this northern shared boundary with Fair Acres. Slightly lower here, so these are 7.7 metres to the ridge, a different approach in terms of materials. So they're finished in black weatherboarding over a brick plinth and with a slate roof. In terms of floor plan, we can see these are 3-bedroom units, 134 square metres internal floor area, which again exceeds that required by NDSS. And these dwellings are also provided with an attached garage. Plots 9 to 14 are on the Church Lane street frontage, so they're formed within these 2 blocks here, so 2 blocks of 3. These are 2-bed units. Again, slightly lower, so they're 6.9 metres in height to the ridge. We can see they're clad in black weatherboarding and they've got a metal roof. And here, just turning to the floor plan, again showing that these 2-bed units, internal floor area in excess of NDSS. Looking now at the proposed landscape plan that's been submitted with the application, we can see here that all the gardens would comply, with the Essex Design Guide. Shared surfaces here and vehicular hard standing denoted by different materials. We will look at this in a moment, but some trees are removed to make way for the development, and I'll look at that plan in a little bit further. They've retained a gap here, so with a view to sort of retaining some views through to the site, to this rear landscaped area and or towards the river. As members will note within the committee report, that does still raise concerns with officers. Looking at some street scenes, this top one is taken from the internal access road looking south. So you can see these 2 properties, the rendered and clay tile, are these 2 here. And then this bottom elevation street scene is standing in the internal courtyard looking north. I apologise, let me just go back there. I wasn't absolutely correct there. So this top elevation, is the street scene. So if you're standing on Church Lane, you've got these 6 with dwellings with a metal roof are sort of behind the existing landscape trees, and these 2 detached dwellings here, are these 2 on the street frontage, so plots 1 and 2, and this elevation towards the bottom. So the proposed section here is if you were standing at the edge of the eastern edge of the site looking back across. Now, these street scenes are taken from the internal access here. So this top one is if you're in the internal access looking south. So here are the 2 rendered properties with the clay roof, plots 3 and 4. And here, if you were standing in that internal access road looking north, you would see those 2 dwellings here, which are these 2 black weatherboarded, and the rest of the development. Here is the tree constraints plan. So these yellow markers here where my cursor are, so the yellow sort of rectangles, are indicating landscape features to be removed. So we can see here is removal of group 1 trees. And again, down here is another removal of group G2, which is another group of trees, and some hedgerow removal at the street site frontage, and some further hedgerow removal along this northern boundary. So turning to some photographs here, this is a view from the application site towards the River Blackwater. A view here from the application site towards the River Blackwater from the adjacent Fair Acres. This is a photograph showing the trees to the front of the site with a view towards the south. And another view here from the site towards Bolins Avenue, and a similar photograph showing that Bolins Avenue access including Fair Acres. Now, this is just a photograph looking back towards Church Lane, so showing the relationship of the site with the street scene. A slightly different one here showing the site towards the adjacent dwelling, at 56 Church Lane. So these two trees are one of the groups of trees that are to be removed. In terms of sort of turning to the summary and planning balance, the layout, scale and design of the development would fail to secure a high standard of design and layout that responds to local character. It would result in harm to the character and appearance of the street scene. The development would be at odds with the linear form of Church Lane, would result in the loss of key views from Church Lane across the site towards the rear and the River Blackwater. The development would result in the loss of protected trees at the site and the pressure to alter and remove other protected trees in the future. Insufficient evidence has been provided to demonstrate that this site can achieve safe access. The development would also trigger the requirement for the delivery of 30% affordable housing on site and a financial contribution towards public open space, which would need to be agreed through a legal agreement, Section 106 legal agreement, and this has not been completed. That also forms a reason for refusal. And furthermore, the requirements to meet with the adverse effect on protected species by reducing disturbance to habitats relating to RAMS, or the Essex Recreational Disturbance Avoidance and Mitigation Strategy, has also not been secured, and members will note forms a reason for refusal. So overall, the proposal would result in some economic benefits with construction, jobs and the contribution that future occupiers would make to the local economy, and social benefits relating to the additional 14 units, 4 of which, as we've noted, are affordable, and the contribution that this would make to the council's 5-year housing land supply. However, members will have read that there would be negative environmental impacts, and the development would fail to secure a high standard of design and layout, and long-term pressures to remove and reduce retained trees at the site. So when considering the planning balance and having regard to local policy and the NPPF, officers have concluded that the adverse impacts of granting permission, as detailed in this summary, would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits when assessed against the policies in the framework taken as a whole. And therefore, officers are recommending to that planning permission be refused. And that's the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lisa, for a very detailed presentation. Councillor Mann wishes to speak. Councillor Mann.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I think that is the correct recommendation. You'll note from the planning history that previous attempts to develop this site have been refused. It was also offered but rejected at the call for sites in this particular local plan process, so it isn't a Section 2 site. And I don't think there'll be any doubt that the development would harm the character, the openness and the identity of the area. The gap is absolutely key, I would suggest to members, and does make a very positive contribution to the character of Church Lane. Members will have noticed sort of development sort of adjacent to the Abbeyfields development, but you must remember that that had special status because of the specialist accommodation that it provides. So it can't be taken as a precedent for further development on this side of Church Lane. I'm sure that development here would, result in harm to the character of the countryside, and especially to the River Valley itself. So, as I said, happy to move officer's recommendation, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Mann. Does it find a seconder before I move on?
Happy to second, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Bowers. Now I see you wish to speak. Councillor Bowers, you can speak next, please.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. Yes, totally agree with the comments made by Councillor Mann. I obviously agree with the officer recommendation and feel they got it completely right with this application. It's also interesting on the ECC Highways point that if there was a potential condition put in, that the site display would end up in the front garden of number 58. So it's something that wouldn't be possible at all. Also, like Councillor Mann alluded to, the character of the countryside, and also the area. I feel like the size, the layout, and the design would just not be adequate to fit in with the local character of the area. It would cause a tremendous amount of harm to the street appearance, and also obviously noticing that there's been no sort of no representation of support in this. It's all been objections, so totally agree with the recommendation, and happy to second, Madam Chairman. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Bowers. I have no one else indicating they wish to speak. That has been moved and seconded that we refuse this application for the reasons given in the report. I'm going to put that to the vote. This is for refusal, members. Councillor Bowers.
For.
Councillor Horner.
For.
Councillor Johnson.
For refusal.
Councillor Mann.
For refusal.
Councillor Mrs. Parker.
For.
Councillor Ritchie.
For refusal.
Councillor Mrs. Spray.
For refusal.
And Councillor Wrench.
For refusal.
Thank you, members. That application has been refused unanimously. Thank you very much indeed. And thank you, Lisa. We now come on to application 5B, application number 20000161 VAR, Great Warley Hall, Ranks Green Road, Fairstead. We do have a statement on this application, the statement from Turling and Fairstead Parish Council, and it's going to be read for us by Alison. Alison, can you read the statement for us now, please?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Alison.
This is the statement of Turling and Fairstead Parish Council. The Parish Council has considered the officer's report to committee on the revised application. We note the application was first registered on 27th January 2020. May officers please explain to the committee why this has taken in excess of a year to bring forward to determine. Members should be aware the Parish Council and its district councillors requested a progress update on 10th of March 2021, which has brought this application to advancement today. Once again, the Parish Council seeks to reconfirm its view that to relax or vary occupancy condition 2 of the existing permission continues to set a dangerous precedent for other consents in the parish and indeed the wider BDC area, as the policy clearly stated as RLP 18 of the adopted local plan document is, quotes, proposals for self-contained annexes to meet the needs of dependent relatives will be permitted, ensuring a condition or obligation that it will remain ancillary accommodation occupied in association with the main dwelling, end quotes. We note the officer's recommendation to approve, and additionally, all that is said about replacement policy LLP 38, which is clearly stated in the report before you. We too now appreciate, quotes, the direction of travel, quotes, being promoted by officers under the draft local plan, but the comment that policy LLP 39, whilst it can only be given limited weight, quotes, provides comfort that the proposal to amend the condition is not so unacceptable that it should be refused, end quotes. This comment suggests BDC is expecting other applications to vary their separate present occupational restrictions on annexes and may use any consent as may be granted as evidential precedent under this not so unacceptable opinion expressed by your officers. Thank you. That's the end of the statement. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed, Alison. Thank you. We'll now come to the presentation, and the presentation is going to be made by Natalie Banks. Thank you, Natalie. Can't hear you.
Apologies, Natalie, your microphone is switched off. Would you like to commence again, please?
Sorry. Good evening, members. I'll just take the opportunity to share my screen with you. Just bear with me one moment. Here we go. Right, this application is being reported in accordance with the transitory arrangements for the Council's new scheme of delegation, as Turling and Fairstead Parish Council has objected to the proposal contrary to officer recommendation. This is a location plan of the site. Great Whalley Hall is a Grade 2 listed former farmhouse set within a large plot, which was originally part of a much larger farmstead. There are 2 barns to the southwest here, one of which is Grade 2 listed in its own right. There is also a listed building to the rear, which is in separate ownership, but which shares an access with Whalley Hall. Oh, that's what I need, isn't it? Yeah, sorry. Okay, this is a photograph of the site showing Great Whalley Hall at the bottom there. And there's the barn to the left. This is showing the extent of the barn in situ, and Whalley Hall again at the rear there. This application seeks permission to amend condition 2, annex occupancy condition of 072375 FUL to allow the annex to be used by those other than dependent relatives. Regarding the Parish Council's concerns, it should be noted that it has been necessary to revise and re-advertise the proposal to ensure that there is no doubt as to what is proposed, to ensure that the correct lawful application is being varied, and to be clear that the applicant has no intention of selling the annex as a separate dwelling, but merely to let it on a short-term basis only. The Historics Building Consultant has commented that if it were proposed to sell the annex and separate it from Great Whalley Hall, it would have been possible to identify a level of harm. However, the proposed removal of the restriction on the occupancy is not objectionable in terms of the historic asset. Whilst policy RLP 18 applied when the application was determined, now that the annex is no longer required for the applicant's dependent relatives, a reasonable planning judgment has to be made in the light of all other relevant policies and criteria and the MPPF. And whilst the objector's comments are noted, each case must be judged on its planning merits. Therefore, the issue of precedent, need, or justification is not relevant. Policy LPP 38 of the draft Section 2 local plan sets out the direction of travel in terms of policy constraints in the countryside and is less restrictive than the adopted policy. And whilst it can be given limited weight, it provides some comfort that the proposal to amend a condition is not so unacceptable that we should be refusing it. That's a photograph of the listed barn, and to the front there is the car parking for the annex. And that's the front elevation of the annex. And this is a site plan when the revised permission was originally determined to vary the original planning application. And this is the application that we are proposing to vary at this point. Going on, the building would be used for residential purposes as it has been up until recent times. Whether the building is occupied by relatives or other people outside the household will make no difference to how the building is used. As long as it retains its historical and physical affiliation to Whalley Hall, we don't think it's unreasonable to conclude that any environmental harm will arise from this proposal. The annex is self-contained and has not been reliant on Whalley Hall in terms of the day-to-day needs of occupiers. However, we feel it's necessary to safeguard the setting of the historic asset to ensure that it's not physically separated, as to do otherwise would result in harm as identified by the historic buildings consultant. It is relevant to note that planning permission would be required for any physical alterations to the building or if any boundary treatments were proposed to be altered in any way. There's the original approved plans and the internal layout of the barn. We therefore recommend that the condition is varied as follows. The annex shall not be separated from its historic relationship to Whalley Hall for use as a separate dwelling unit, and therefore shall not be sold, transferred or otherwise disposed of except by way of a disposal comprising the whole of the site edged in red as identified on the submitted location plan. And the reason is to ensure that the historical integrity of Great Whalley Hall is maintained. Thank you, members. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Thank you, Natalie. Councillor Mrs. Spray.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you, Natalie, for your very clear presentation. I think for me this is is relatively straightforward. I take on board the parish council's concerns about this, but as Natalie's just clearly explained, and there is no physical change to this building. It is not to be sold off separately. It is for rental. And that's what the applicants have said it is for, which I think is acceptable. I can't actually see any reason why this should be refused. You know, if they want to do anything different with it, so separate it off or sell it, then it will have to come back as a planning application. But the condition is very clear that we are not allowing that. And I certainly think that that we and the Historic Buildings Advisor would have an issue with it if that was the case. So bearing all that in mind, Chairman, I'm happy to move officer's recommendation for approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs. Spray. Councillor, I need a seconder before I move on. Sorry.
Happy to second you.
Thank you, Councillor Mann. And you wish to speak? I see you.
Well, simply to say that I agree with everything that Councillor Spray has said. I mean, the parish council are quite right to be sort of alarmed, and we get this dilemma quite often. We can't expect people to have an unending supply of dependent relatives and annexes. There'll come a point at almost every time where we've permitted an annex that its particular use we no longer required. So I think as long as we always keep, condition 2 in mind, that we won't allow separate sale, then precedent won't be sort of created, and it is a case of each on its own merit. What did intrigue me was that we allow annexes that are self-contained but are supposed to be ancillary accommodation occupied in association with the host dwelling. And this one has somehow become sort of so self-contained, doesn't require the host dwelling in any way, and can be separated off as a straight rental. So I mean that is an intriguing point, but not one I will labour any further, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Mann. Actually, I had one very similar in my ward, and we refused the change, and they went to appeal and won. So, and it was totally away from the house completely. It was quite a walk from the house, but they won on appeal. So I can see where our officers are coming from. Well, no one else has indicated they wish to speak. Councillor Mrs. Spray has moved that we approve this application. Councillor Mann has seconded it, so I'm going to put that to the vote. This is for approval, members. Councillor Bowers.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Horner.
For.
Councillor Johnson.
For approval.
Councillor Mann.
For approval.
Councillor Mrs. Parker.
For approval.
Councillor Ritchie.
For.
Councillor Mrs. Spray.
For.
Councillor Wrench.
For.
Thank you, members. That has been approved unanimously. Thank you very much, and thank you, Natalie. We now come on to the next application, which is application 5C. It is application number 20014864, 95 Newland Street, Whittam. And we do have a speaker. We have Mr. Rob Marsh-Filey. He is the agent. Good evening, Mr. Marsh-Filey. I do hope you've cut your speech down, because I will be timing you for 3 minutes and no longer. Thank you. He's gone. Application number 20014864, 95 Newland Street.
Sorry, are you ready for me? Sorry.
Yes, thank you.
Apologies. Thank you, Chairman. The Conservation Officer commented on the proposals on the 6th of November. These were then discussed with minor alterations informally with the Planning Officer, and the scheme was amended and revisions made to address some of the concerns raised. The revised scheme in response to the comments was issued to you earlier. The principal concerns were the number of units, scale and impact on the listed buildings. The current site is a waste ground with a very negative impact on both the setting of the listed building and the wider conservation areas. The site is dominated by parking, enclosed by surrounding buildings that are a mixture of poor quality two-storey flat-roofed extensions with air conditioning plant and waste bin collection areas. The ad hoc parking on demolished building slabs and temporary fencing with the southern boundary bordered by the two-storey Parkview care home service areas represents an uninviting and uncared for site within the conservation area. The proposals represent a significant improvement to the backland area as a whole, introducing a lively, well-articulated building that has a number of large upper floor landscaped areas that would add a variety of life to current underutilized space. The reduction in number of units suggested in the revisions allow these landscaped areas to be increased, allowing more light to both in the individual units and the buildings themselves. The orientation and angled windows and the balconies of the rear wings would allow light, but restrict possible overlooking issues between the units and the surrounding buildings. The reduction in height of all the units and the removal of attic accommodation to the units fronting the development have reduced the scale of the buildings. The elevations have also been simplified to provide a more cohesive development that becomes subservient to the main street frontage. The traditional materials of render slate roofs will complement and match some of the surrounding buildings without trying to compete with their status as a low-key elevation within which complements the area. Braintree Council has a current shortfall of housing, significant shortfall of housing, with only 3.7 years of land supply, making the current local plan policies out of date, and the national planning policy framework would therefore take precedent over the decision-making process and its presumption in favour of sustainable development. This development, while not fulfilling that shortfall, does represent a viable reuse of redundant brownfield sites in a sustainable town centre location, ideally suited to residential development. The conservation team has already conceded that their site is in need of redevelopment and that residential use would be acceptable. However, the site needs to be viable financially in order to be achievable. And to achieve this, the site's capacity needs to be maximised. This may have resulted in the initially presented scheme pushing those boundaries. We have therefore reflected and responded to this in the comments made by the conservation team by submitting amendments that reduce both the numbers of units and scale of the proposed development. We believe, therefore, that the scheme demonstrates it can achieve the targets set out in the NPPF in providing a benefit in both social, economic and environmental grounds, and therefore should be granted. Hopefully that was 3 minutes.
Just slightly over, but I was letting you finish. Thank you very much indeed for making your statements, much appreciated. If you'd like to now listen to the presentation, which is going to be made by Andrew Martin. Andrew, please can you have your presentation now?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Bear with me, members. I'll just open up my presentation for you. So this item is a plan application for the residential development of 10 townhouses and land to the rear of 95 Newland Street in Witham. Before I move on to the detailed presentation, I just thought it would be worth picking up on a few of the comments made by Mr. Marsh-Feely. In the first instance, whilst conservation objections were raised in November, no such revisions were agreed, and in fact I didn't provide any detailed feedback on any of the revisions, but rather made it quite clear that the changes needed were so fundamental that they should be subject to a separate plan application, and indeed pre-application advice. There was no pre-application advice sought in this instance, and that to my mind is the most appropriate way of securing revisions to a scheme or working with the local planning authority to achieve a satisfactory outcome. So I just thought it would be important to highlight that. But Moving on to the presentation, what you can see here is the site location plan outlining the site in red. Either side of it here, you've got number 95 Newland Street and number 99 just to the south there. You've got Newland Street running along to the front of the site, and to the rear of the site, you've got Newlands Place, which is an unadopted highway that one part of the proposal shows access onto this, and I'll come on to that shortly. But as you can see here on this Ordnance Survey overlay, there's some built forms shown towards this end of the site, which has since been demolished at some time between 2000 and 2005. So it does constitute previously developed land within town development boundary of Witham, and it is located within the conservation area of Witham. And there's a number of Grade 2 listed buildings within the locality of the site, including at number 91 and 89 Newland Street, which are around here. So for the context, this is a photo from Newland Street facing onto the site. You've got 95 Newland Street here, and Lloyd's Bank there is number 99. So the gap between those two buildings is where the main access into the site would be achieved. I tried to get a photo here to sort of illustrate how you can get glimpses into the site from within Newland Street. Unfortunately, I couldn't get a photo at this particular time to stand directly in front of the access, but you get the general idea. This is a photo taken within the access into the site, looking towards its rear. And this is looking towards the southeast boundary. And you can see that the site's currently hard standing with use informally for car parking. And there's a wall along the boundary there. And this is the rear of number 99 Newland Street. You can see there's a bin store and rear access to the property, and the new dwellings proposed would be situated facing onto that area. This is a photo looking towards the rear of the site, and you can see some of the existing residential development beyond Newlands Place. Again, that's looking back towards the rear of number 99. And you can see there's first floor windows within the rear of number 99. And then this is looking towards the rear of number 95 and the listed buildings at number 91 and 89 Newland Street. Again, you can see that at number 95, there are first floor rear windows and a rear access for services. And that's looking towards the adjacent site to the north. And this shows a gate where access has previously been obtained onto Newlands Place, which connects to the public highway via King's Chase. So in terms of heritage assets, the site is here. You can see the yellow line indicating the Witham Conservation Area. And here you've got number 91 Newland Street and number 89 Newland Street. For the reasons detailed in the report, the Conservation Officer identified harm to the significance of the Witham Conservation Area and also the setting of number 91 Newland Street, which is a Grade 2 listed building. The harm generally arises from the amount of development proposed, its massing and detailed design, which are considered to be incongruous to its context and in no way subordinate, which is something you'd expect on a backland development within a heritage context. This is the existing block plan, so not much to see here. There's nothing currently occupying the site other than hard standing, but you would have had some buildings here previously, and the land on that basis is previously developed land, and it's considered that there is potential for contamination. And in this application, no contamination information was submitted, and Environmental Health have since identified that there is concern and that insufficient information has been submitted with regards to contamination to assess whether that would be acceptable, and therefore that forms a further reason for refusal. Moving on to the design of the proposal, this is the ground floor plan. So you can see there how the access would come in from Newland Street, and you can see there's an access shown there onto Newlands Place. What immediately is quite notable is how close proximity these buildings are at the front to the rear of existing commercial premises in Newland Street. And I wasn't, when reviewing the scheme, happy with the relationship between these properties and the existing commercial premises, and particularly at plot 4, where you've got a kitchen room and a dining room that would sort of face out onto the bin store and rear access for the commercial premises. I'd consider that to be very poor outlook and amenity, and in general, amenity and design has been a fundamental concern with respect to this plan application. One of the other issues is the close proximity between the properties to the rear of the secondary frontage to be created and their close proximity to one another. The overall impression is, as I've detailed in the report, is that the site is one that would benefit from very limited natural daylight, absence of surveillance at the ground floor level, and ultimately falls far short of the design standard we would expect, and that is so heavily emphasised within national and local policy and supplementary guidance. And another reason for refusal that was admittedly noted at a late stage in plan application was that the rear access onto Newlands Place. Newlands Place isn't an adopted highway, and for planning purposes, you need to demonstrate access to the public highway within the red line. And so the failure to demonstrate an access to the public highway within the red line to the rear of the site forms another reason for refusal. It is acknowledged that ordinarily, if this was one of the only reasons for refusal, there may be opportunity to go back and seek a revision, but in this case it wasn't determined necessary given the fundamental concerns at hand. Looking at the first floor plans, you can see here that some attempts have been made to provide external amenity spaces, which is to an extent admirable within a high density environment. However, the quality of external amenity spaces is very, very important in a high density environment. And here the gardens would be very constrained in nature, and many, if not all, would lack provision of natural daylight given the built form and the orientation of the site. And the balconies as well, you can see there would be very close proximity to one another. There'd be very limited opportunity for privacy within this development for future occupiers. And here is where the first floor windows would face onto the rear of commercial premises that potentially have views back towards the application site and into their living environments. And at first floor, it's much the same in terms of the balconies, in quite close proximity to one another with limited opportunity for privacy. And also in the report, it was noted that plots 4 and 7 have such a small second bedroom, it cannot really be considered legitimate for that purpose. And in general, the internal living environment of those dwellings is quite cramped. And you've also got a situation again whereby there's opportunities for overlooking and potentially mutual views between private residential rooms. These are the elevations submitted. You can see here that the massing is quite significant within the initial frontage of the site. Bearing in mind the scale of development within Newland Street, this was wholly unbalanced, the hierarchy of built form within the conservation area. And the design sort of merges contemporary and historical elements to the extent that they don't really neatly fit into either, and officers weren't satisfied that that was considered acceptable. And just more elevations there. And then here you can see what's labelled as the east side elevation. If you were on the outside of the site looking into that, it's pretty poor design in terms of that elevation, in terms of solid to void ratios, and a rather elongated massing and amount of development doesn't respond well to the constraints of the site. And here you've got a few visualizations from various vantages showing a bit more detail how the site could transpire. And you've got this view down here, which sort of shows that the view termination is to a parked car, which isn't desirable in design terms, and car parking should, where possible, be visually mitigated. So to bring it to an overall conclusion, the site represents previously developed land within the town development boundary of Witham, less than substantial harm has been identified to heritage assets with insufficient public benefits advanced to outweigh the harm, fails to achieve a appropriate standard of design and residential amenity, insufficient information has been submitted with regards to land contamination. The application does not demonstrate that rear access proposed would connect to the public the public highway network, Economic, social and environmental benefits would arise from the provision of 10 dwellings in a sustainable location through the redevelopment of previously developed land. But having regard to the identified benefits and harms, it is concluded that the benefits would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the harms, even if the tilted balance were to apply. And I would, as a final point, add to that, Mr. Marsh-Feely referred to the tilted balance, but in this instance, under footnote 6 of the MPPF, the tilted balance does not apply where policies within the framework provide a clear reason for refusal, and heritage policies are included within that. So the tilted balance, in officers' view, does not apply in this instance. But even so, if that were to be found otherwise, let's say appeal, officers still feel that even without the tilted balance, the benefits would significantly and the harm, would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the harms. Apologies, there's a typo there. I've put it's concluded that the benefits would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the harms. It should be the other way around. It's concluded that the harms would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. A Section 106 agreement would be required to secure necessary plan obligations, and the absence of such an agreement represents a further reason for refusal. So the RAM's contribution and public open space, we wouldn't have sought to secure that given officers were not in support of the application. And overall recommendation is that officers seek a resolution to refuse plan permission. That concludes my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Andrew. That's quite an interesting presentation. I have no one wishing to speak. They're obviously all absorbing what you've been telling us. Councillor Mrs. Spray.
Thank you, Chairman. I thought if nobody else wanted to go first, I would. Thank you, Andrew, for your presentation. I was going to start by saying I was a bit perplexed as to why we were looking at and discussing this application when the speaker said that a revised scheme had been submitted, which in his original statement this morning he said that we believe that would now make the proposals acceptable. However, I think Andrew has explained that, but I might just ask him to clarify, and that that revised scheme or schemes were not sort of formally discussed with officers, and that it might have been better if they had actually presented it as a completely new application, in which case we would have been looking at and discussing something different this evening. Is that correct, Andrew, if I could ask you through, Chairman?
Yeah, just to qualify, the revisions were put to me in terms of revised proposals, but officers are not obliged to accept revisions, especially where it's not considered they address the fundamental nature of the concerns. And so it wasn't considered appropriate to agree those revisions. And it wasn't a case of revisions were put to me and I provide detailed response and said these would be acceptable. That wasn't the case. They were put to me and I was quite clear from the outset that in my communication, these are the concerns. If you were seeking a revised proposal, it would be of a fundamentally different nature and would require a separate plan application, and that we would recommend pre-application advice as the most appropriate way to move forward on the site, and that we do not, and we did not accept those revisions, no. So the revisions issued to members today are not the application that's before you for determination this evening. I hope that clarifies.
Yeah, yes, it does. Thank you very much. Thank you,
Andrew. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, it does. So I think there is no doubt that this site could do with something happening on it. It's not exactly attractive. And I think in view of that, it is a pity that the applicant didn't take on board perhaps the officer's advice and withdraw this and come back with something which may well have been acceptable. I think it's unusual. In fact, when we get an officer's recommendation for refusal, there are generally one, maybe two reasons for refusal. We've got no less than, I think it's 7 this evening on this one. So there is quite a lot for the applicant to do, but it is a pity that perhaps that they didn't go away, rethink it and come back with something that we could perhaps have found acceptable tonight. There are, you know, say 7 good reasons for refusal on this. It does look to me as though they have tried to cram too much on the site. I take on board the speaker's comment that obviously it's got to be financially viable. Yes, I appreciate that, but not to the detriment of the amenity space for future occupants or to the detriment of the surrounding area. And I think there's just too much going on here, and the design doesn't fit. It's not a good match, I'm afraid. So I am happy to go with officer's recommendation for refusal and move that. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs. Spray. Does that find a seconder before I move on to the next speaker, please?
Yes, I'd be happy to second that.
Thank you,
Chairman.
Councillor Mrs. Parker. And I've got you speaking next, which is quite useful. I'll
Okay.
ask you to speak now.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I'm afraid I also agree with the officer's recommendation. I appreciate, obviously, this is a very sustainable location. It is a site that could be developed, and I appreciate it has a lot of problems though, just because of the physical size of the site, and it is a very awkward shape, and also there are the issues that it's been previously developed land, so it's obviously a difficult, although it's a very sustainable location, it is obviously a difficult site to develop, and it's difficult to come up with something that will be acceptable. But and I do appreciate the desire to have a kind of muse-like development there, and some of the elements I think, you know, could be quite interesting with the living walls and the outside spaces in a very constrained in a constrained site, an urban site. But I'm afraid I agree that there are just too many compromises here. I think for me the really big issue is this lack is the amenity, I'm afraid, for the future residents. It's just we just can't allow that level of overlooking and the outlook of from some of the properties and the size of the rooms. That's just not it. We just can't allow that. And as far as the design is concerned, I mean, I do appreciate this attempt to make it fit within the conservation area, but that, for me, I always find it a bit confusing. I think it's almost better really not to try to sort of to emulate, if you like, the older design, but almost come up with something completely different. I think sometimes that can work better in a conservation area, though I'm obviously not as qualified as the officers on that sort of personal view, really. But yes, I mean, for all the reasons put forward, I'm afraid I can't support this application, and I'm happy to second refusal. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs. Parker. Councillor Mann.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Well, both previous speakers have identified very significant points and very eloquently, so I don't need to repeat all those. I think a fundamental area was not to seek sort of pre-application advice, which is a very poor starting point. Do accept that this is an area sort of dying to be redeveloped, but it's got to be appropriate. I mean, wasn't there one point in the report where it said it was equivalent to a density of 100 per hectare, which is, you know, just too much on this side. It's not muse-like at all. I concede also that it's got to be viable, but I'm sure that, you know, working with officers, then something can be put together that could be developed here and would significantly improve the site. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mann. Thank you. I have no one else wishing to speak at the present time? I'll just give you a minute or two. No one else is indicating they wish to speak. Well, it has been moved by Councillor Mrs. Spray and seconded by Councillor Mrs. Parker that we refuse this application for the 7 reasons given. I'm going to put that to the vote. Councillor Bowers, this is for refusal.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Horner.
For refusal.
Councillor Johnson.
For refusal.
Councillor Mann.
For refusal.
Councillor Mrs. Parker.
For refusal.
Councillor Ritchie.
For refusal.
Councillor Mrs. Spray.
For refusal.
And Councillor Wrench.
For refusal.
Thank you, members. That has once again been refused unanimously. And thank you very much, Mr. Marsh-Feely, for your contribution. I hope I've seen you making notes furiously during the conversation, so I'm sure you'll be coming back with something. And thank you for attending. We now move on to the next application, which is application 5D, application number 20011897 out, Rectory Meadow, Bradwell. I do have a speaker on this. This is Mr. Mark Jackson, as the agent is speaking on this application. Good evening, Mr. Jackson, and welcome to our meeting. You are muted, Mr. Jackson. You're still muted. We can't hear you unless you unmute. Oh, that's
Hello.
better. Good evening. Thank you. You have
Thank
3
you.
minutes. Thank you.
Good evening, councillors. I'm instructed by McDonald Mohan to make a statement in support of their planning application. This application involves the redevelopment of a brownfield site adjoining the development boundary of Bradwell for 3 houses. Planning permission was granted in 2018 for the same development, and since this time extensive decontamination investigatory survey work has been undertaken. The planning permission has recently expired and the applicants wish to renew it. Former use. Historically, the site was used as a gravel pit during the middle of the last century, and the site was operated as a transport and haulage yard until 2002. From 2003 to 2008, the site and access road were used by a scaffolding company. This business operated from 5:30 in the morning up until occasionally 8 in the evening. Planning permission for this use was granted in October 2006, application reference 06/00723/COU. In more recent times, the buildings have been used as a vehicle repair centre, but this use ceased in about 2016. The planning appeal. In 2018, planning permission was granted to demolish the commercial buildings and structures and erect 3 houses. The proposer was allowed at appeal. The inspector commented that the site was previously developed land. Furthermore, she considered that the location of the site was close to existing dwellings within the settlement. She also commented that the site was as close to the services and bus stops as other houses in the village. She concluded that the site was suitable for housing and agreed with the council that there would be no harm to the character and appearance of the area. The current position. This current application simply seeks to renew the planning permission to bring the site forward following the contamination investigatory works. The applicants have an express legal right of way over Rectory Meadow. No objections have been received from the statutory consultees. This includes the council's ecology team, environmental health, and Essex County Council highways. In planning terms, the site is in an accessible village location. The proposal is in full compliance with the up-to-date exception criteria of Policy 7 of the Neighbourhood Plan on Housing. The removal of the commercial non-conforming use, decontamination of the site, together with the economic and social benefits of the 3 replacement dwellings, will contribute to the viability and sustainability of the village. Given the inspector's decision, compliance with the most up-to-date neighbourhood plan, and the advice of the planning officers, the council is respectfully invited to grant outline planning permission, subject to the imposition of the planning conditions set out on pages 87 to 92 of your agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. Thank you very much indeed. We'll now come to the presentation, which is going to once again be made by Andrew. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, members. Oh, I'll need to exit the full screen there. Okay, there we are. And so this item relates to outline plan application with all matters reserved except access and scale for the demolition of existing commercial buildings and the erection of 3 two-storey dwelling houses at Rectory Meadow, Bradwell. This application is brought before members of the Planning Committee in accordance with the transitionary arrangements of the scheme of delegation, as the Parish Council have objected to the application contrary to officer's recommendation. This is the location plan showing the site. You can see on this location plan that there's the outline of existing buildings on the site, but in fact there's one further small building there, and there's also a subterranean concrete structure in this area. You can see that the site here, it connects to Rectory Meadow, which then goes on to form part of Church Road, which then merges into the street. And I'll come back to this shortly, but the application was in this instance revised during the course of the application to extend the red line to the public highway, as originally it did not fully extend the public highway. But otherwise, you can see here you've got the village envelope of Bradwell, which runs along this eastern boundary of the site. And here you've got the former fish pond. To the north, you've got Coggeshall Road with some residential development in the intervening gap and an agricultural field. So moving to the photos, this is a photo taken from the street looking into Church Road. And just round this bend is where you then move into Rectory Meadow. This is a photo taken from the track near to the entrance of the site, looking back towards existing residential development within Rectory Meadow. This is a photo standing in the same point, but looking into the site where the access would go in, and you can just about see there one of the larger buildings on the site. And again, this is from a closer vantage point, and you can see there the further existing buildings within the site starting to come into frame. It's a close-up of the larger building. This is to the side of that building. This is the concrete structure I was referring to. From my understanding, it was originally had something to do with the minerals extraction from the fish, what is now the fishing pond. This is a photo you can see here where the scaffolders yard operated. That was formerly the office, and you've got another large outbuilding there, and quite a lot of waste on the site at present. And this is a further building on the site, which is probably the smallest on the site. It's relatively insignificant structure, but an existing building nonetheless. And this is a view looking out over the area of land to the front of those buildings. And this is a photo taken from the other side of the fishing pond, looking towards the application site to give you an impression of the degree of vegetative screening between the site and its surroundings, and this was taken in winter months, so it's quite a thick coverage of vegetation there. So it's in terms of plan history, it's quite important to note that the site has previously operated under various commercial uses, with the latter and most recent use having ceased by 2009, which is a scaffolding company. That's what we've got a plan history record of. The site, it has been noted and commented in objections, was unsuccessfully promoted as part of a wider proposed residential allocation under the course sites process, but that related to a far greater site that extended beyond this site and was considered unsuitable for various reasons, but not intrinsically related to the application site in the scale under this application. Plan permission was sought and refused in 2017 for an identical proposal to that sought under the current proposal being considered. And the local planning authority's decision was appealed and allowed. So turning to the policy assessment of the application, as of set out quite a bit of length in the officer's report. One of the fundamental considerations in this instance is policy 7 of the Bradwell with Padderswick neighbourhood plan, which relates to housing. And that sets out that proposals for residential development will be supported where the proposed development is located within defined settlement boundaries. That's the first criterion of Part A of Policy 7. And in this instance, the proposal would not meet that criteria as it is not located in defined settlement boundaries. The remainder of that policy goes on to refer to various other matters we would ordinarily consider when looking at housing development in terms of design, heritage assets and so on. So what's most important then moving forward is how it compares to Part B of that same policy, which is that development proposals for small-scale residential development extensions and conversions for residential use outside the Bradwell Village settlement boundaries shall be supported as an exception to planning policies where they, and it sets out then 3 criteria, exception criteria as it were. The first being can demonstrate a significant contribution towards maintaining the future viability and sustainability of the adjacent settlement, or adjacent to an existing settlement or hamlet, and do not provide a linear extension to Bradwell Village along Coggeshall Road, Church Road, Rectory Meadow or Hollies Road. So officers have given this some careful consideration, as whilst consistency in decision making is important for public confidence in the exercise of the statutory function, it's also important to acknowledge what changes there have been in circumstance since a previous plan permission was granted. And as set out in the report, one of the main changes is this policy 7, the other being the Section 1 local plan. The Section 1 local plan changes simply supersede some previous policies, and another material consideration arises from that is that the housing supply has reduced, and the other change in circumstances that the neighbourhood plan was made. So it's important to assess the application against policy 7, and in this instance officers are of the view that the proposed development does comply with policy 7. And that being, whilst it does not comply with paragraph I of policy 7, it does then go on, in officers' view, to meet the exception criteria under Part B. Officers consider the proposed development can demonstrate a significant contribution towards maintaining the future viability and sustainability of the adjacent settlement by repurposing previously developed land, making effective use of land, to provide 3 new family homes, the occupants of which would increase household expenditure and demand for services and businesses. So it's not an ordinary development. It would be repurposing previously developed land, it would be remediating that and improving the environmental quality of the site. And it's also considered that significant contribution has to be viewed relative to the small scale nature of development that the exception criteria allow for. The site is evidently adjacent to the existing settlement of Bradwell, and the final criteria is the proposed development would not provide a linear extension to Bradwell Village along Rectory Meadow, as it would change the use of an existing site from a commercial use to a residential use by replacing existing built form with 3 new dwellings. So in effect, it's understood that that part of policy 7 is clearly intended to prevent urban sprawl beyond existing boundaries along key road routes. In this instance, the site exists and it does not therefore represent a linear extension to the village. It is a repurposing of a site and removal of built form and replacing it with new built form. In terms of sustainability of location, this has by and large been determined by the plan inspector, who found the site to be sustainably located, given whilst there are limited facilities within Bradwell Village, the site constitutes previously developed land with footpath linkages through to nearby bus stops in Coggeshall Road that provide frequent services to larger settlements such as Braintree, Colchester and Chelmsford, and concluded that the proposed development would make effective use of previously developed land, with future occupants also able to benefit from acceptable access to services, facilities and employment by means other than private car use. So limited harm would arise from private car journeys likely to be generated when assessed against the event plan and the MPPF as a whole. So on balance, it is considered that the application site is sustainable for the proposed development. This is just a slide to elaborate on what I said earlier in terms of the revision. There was a second round of consultation completed during the course of the application, and that was to supersede the plan on the left with that on the right. You can see that the red line terminates just by the old rectory on the former plan, whereas on the most recent plan, that red line extends to the public highway and therefore demonstrates the necessary connection. And just to comment on that, Essex County Council Highways, the Highway Authority, have been consulted on the plan application and returned no objections. So moving on to the matters for consideration, scale is one of the matters that's been brought forward as part of this outline plan permission, and that establishes a parameter of 7.2 metres in height, which is essentially a two-storey dwelling, which is considered to be acceptable and appropriate for the site's development. These drawings are not necessarily reflective of what the appearance of the buildings would be. That's subject to consideration under reserved matters of appearance still, so there is still control over that element. And this is the general design and layout. Whilst layout is a reserved matter, it's important for officers just to be satisfied that the amount of development proposed can be satisfactorily provided on the site. And here it's clear that the amount of development proposed can be quite comfortably accommodated on the site, providing for a good standard of residential amenity. And there would be ample opportunity at reserved matters application stage to secure a satisfactory development. The trees, there are a number of trees on the site, including along the edge with the fishing pond. Most of these trees would remain unaffected by the proposal in many respects, and limited incursion into root protection areas other than one incursion shown here, which is the garage into the root protection area of one tree. But again, layout is not a matter for consideration at this stage, so that isn't really too material to consideration because there's scope for that to change. But officers were minded to attach a condition for an arboricultural method statement to the outline permission, and that's explained within the report. So just to summarise and conclude, outline plan permission for identical proposed development recently lapsed in February following an allowed appeal in 2018. The red line has been revised since submission of the application in order to demonstrate a connection to the public highway. No objections to the statutory consultees other than from Bradwell with Padstock Parish Council. Complies, in officer's view, with exception criteria under Policy 7 of the Bradwell with Padstock Neighbourhood Plan. Proposal would represent effective use of previously developed land in an accessible location for a rural context. Details submitted for approval of access and scale are considered acceptable. RAMS payment has been received in accordance with the Habitats Regulation Assessment. And having regards to the identified benefits and harms, it is concluded that the benefits of the proposal would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the harms in the tilted balance. Recommendation is therefore that officers seek a resolution to grant plan permission subject to conditions. Thank you, members. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you very much indeed. Members. No one wants to speak. Oh, hang on. Councillor Mrs. Parker.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yes, I'll kick off. And thank you, Andrew, for what is a very detailed report and very clearly set out. And so I'm grateful for that. I think you have set it out, explained it all very clearly to us this evening. We obviously are in a situation where planning permission was granted on appeal. The inspector decided that it was in a sustainable location. And as you've pointed out in your report, we're really looking at what's changed since then. And I do agree with you about the point about consistency. I think that is an important legal principle, actually. And there are two things, really. The main things that change is, one, we don't have a 5-year housing land supply. And secondly is, importantly, the neighbourhood plan. And I think you have set that out quite clearly as to why you think that this development would be compliant with the neighbourhood plan. And I do agree with your analysis. The only point I wanted to make really was that in 7B, the point that the development proposals for small scale residential development, which this is, are outside the settlement boundary shall be supported if they can demonstrate a significant contribution towards maintaining the viability of the settlement. And I do think within settlements, small villages like this, 3 family houses actually can make quite a significant difference to the village, quite often bringing families into the village and just supporting the life of the village. So even though it's only 3 houses, I do think that actually can be significant in a small village like this. So I'm actually happy to move officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs. Parker. Does it find a seconder before I move on?
Happy to second, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Mann. I have you down for speaking next. So would you like to speak now?
Thank you, Chairman. I have to declare that Lord Justice Mann is no relation, though he's obviously very sound on planning. And the point he makes about consistency, I think, is very valid. I look back at the first submission that was refused and won on appeal. The parish council, as far as I can tell, provided no comments on that application at all, and now perhaps they are being a trifle inconsistent in that they are making a sort of a formal objection here. But I do accept that, you know, the only thing really materially that has changed is the introduction of the neighbourhood plan, and they obviously believe that it's ruled out under policy 7, but I think it's been demonstrated to us this evening that this is a repurposing of the site, that you're replacing built form with built form. So there is already a sort of a linear development, although it's not at this time sort of housing. And you know, thank you for the report. Very, very closely argued and closely worded. But I think we're drawn, particularly with the impetus of the inspector's decision, to you know, support the recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Mann. Councillor Ritchie.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. The officer's mentioned an additional condition about a tree report that could be added to the recommendation. Is that actually, I can't actually in the report, is that something that we would have to add now or later?
If I could just come back on that, thank you, Councillor Ritchie. Sorry if I miscommunicated that in my presentation, but hopefully I'll cover it off in the report. That is a condition that I have attached already, and it's within the recommendation. The reason I outlined it in the report is the inspector didn't attach that same condition, but I considered it to be necessary given the very principle of demolishing the buildings could have an impact on the trees, and so therefore didn't consider it to be a reserved matter. So I thought it was important to attach that arboricultural method statement condition, and that was agreed with the applicant via the plan agent Mark Jackson. So that is forms part of the recommendation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew, for answering that question. Councillor Ritchie, have you completed what you wanted to ask?
Yes, as long as there was no recourse, and as long as it's been agreed, then it's absolutely fine. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs. Spray.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to make a quick comment really about neighbourhood plans. They are important documents, and once adopted, they do have a real role to play in planning decisions, in giving villages protection against unwanted development. But having said that, what they don't do and can't do is to stop any and all development where such developments are considered to be appropriate. I appreciate them putting forward their argument for, you know, for this for this site, but also, I think we've got sort of 2.5 pages of very well reasoned argument by our officer here. I read it through carefully several times because it's slightly complex, but I do think the point is well made. And Councillor Parker made it too, that we have 3 houses here which could be of a real benefit to what is a small village. Could bring young families in, which I think is something we all welcome. And we have an appeal decision which is very relevant to our decision this evening. So it's not to in any way lessen or dismiss the neighbourhood plan, but I think the argument in favour of this particular site is well made. So I'm happy to support. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs. Spray. I have no one else indicating they wish to speak, so I'm going to put this to the vote. It was moved by Councillor Mrs. Parker, seconded by Councillor Mann, that we approve this application. I'm going to put Councillor Bowers.
For.
Councillor Horner.
For.
Councillor Johnson.
For approval.
Councillor Mann.
For approval.
Councillor Mrs. Parker.
For.
Councillor Ritchie.
For.
Councillor Mrs. Spray.
For.
Councillor Wrench.
For.
Thank you, members. That has also been approved unanimously. Now brings us on to application 5E, and this is application number 20022203 REM Canine Cottage, Netherhill, Gestingthorpe. I have 2 speakers on this application, and the first statement is going to be read by Alison, and it's a statement from a Mr. Mark Taylor. Alison, can you read this for me, please? Or
Thank you,
us,
Madam
please?
Chairman. Yes, thank you. This is a statement by Mr. Mark Taylor. With regards to the above application, having reviewed the proposed dwelling on the Council's planning website, my concerns are as follows. 1. The scale of the proposed gives the size of the plot seems to be overdeveloped. The house looks far too big and squeezed into a plot that has a limited frontage given the size of the proposed property. 2. The ridge/eaves height looks disproportionately too high to the adjoining properties. 3. The windows to the side elevation, south, would create loss of privacy to Hillcrest, being so close to the boundary. 4. The close proximity to the existing boundary wall and outbuildings to Hillcrest gives extreme concern when foundations would be dug given the age of these structures. They have been in existence many years and form part of the past trading history of the village. I'm currently in the process of arranging the refurbishment of the roof and would have brickwork repairs carried out to ensure the longevity of the building and wall. I would like to have an understanding of how close the groundwork would be to this area should work commence. And that's from Mr. Mark Taylor of Hillcrest, Netherhill, Gestingthorpe. That's the end of the statement. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you very much, Alison. We'll now go on to the Chairman of Gestingthorpe Parish Council, Councillor David Smith. Good evening, Councillor Smith. Would you like to make your statement now, please?
Good evening, Chair and Councillors. Outline approval was granted on the 17th of August 2020 for the erection of 1 dwelling and a garage with all matters reserved. The application was silent on the frontage and depth of the site, although it included an indicative front elevation. The Parish Council submitted the following comments. This is an outline planning application for a single dwelling with all matters reserved on what appears to be a relatively small site. There are no plot dimensions on either the application form or the site plan, making it difficult for the Parish Council to make informed comments on the proposal. Bearing this in mind, we suggest that in this instance, a full detailed planning application to include details for foul and surface water drainage would be more appropriate. The neighbour from Hillcrest also submitted a similar objection. The application before you this evening is for the approval of all reserved matters, and the PC submitted the following comments. Refusal on grounds of overdevelopment. The design is suburban, It is not in keeping with the character of the properties either side. The ridgeline is considerably higher and, if approved, will be a blot on Nether Hill. The neighbour from Hillcrest also submitted a further objection. The proposal does not accord with policy RLP 90, which requires designs to recognise and reflect local distinctiveness in terms of scale, density, height and mass of buildings. From the drawings submitted, the site has a frontage of 10.55 m, which is 34'6", which is extremely narrow in this rural location. The scale, density, height and mass of the proposed dwelling does not reflect the adjoining properties. The ridge is 0.7 metres, which is 2'3", higher than the adjoining properties. In addition, the existing access serving K9 Cottage is to be widened to serve both properties. We have concerns over the practicalities of the access. From the drawings submitted, the access to the new build is only 2.42 metres wide, 8 foot, and it runs to the side of the property, but increases to 2.9 metres, 9'6", to the front of the garage. We suggest that vehicles will find it difficult to enter and leave the site in reverse gear. We fear this will lead to vehicles being parked on the verge on the opposite side of the road, destroying the verge and rutting the edge of the carriageway. The application makes reference to the new dwelling on the plot adjoining Boulders. This has a frontage of 15.5 metres, 50 foot. The front wall is set back almost to the line of the rear wall of Boulders and enjoins open farmland. In our view, hardly a suitable comparison. The principle of development has been established by the grant of outline approval. However, this clearly represents, in our view, overdevelopment of a small infill plot, where a more modest dwelling reflecting the character of adjoining properties would be more in keeping. In essence, you can't pour a quart into a pint pot. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you very much, Councillor Smith. We'll now come to the presentation. The presentation is going to be made by Natalie. Thank you, Natalie.
Thank you. Just bear with me. Oh, stupid. There it is. Oh, sorry, my eyes are not playing up this evening. Here we go. Here we go. Right. Apologies for that. This is a reserved matters application for the approval of access layout, appearance, scale and landscaping of outline permission 20483 OUT, direction of one dwelling and garage at K9 Cottage, Nether Hill, Gestingthorpe. Oops. Here's a location plan of the site. You will see here the dwelling. The mix of and plots, sizes of plots and the types of dwellings that you've got in this locality are fairly varied. You've got different widths, some are narrower, some are wider, and but the overall sort of character of the area is fairly traditional in design. K9 Cottage is a semi-detached dwelling located outside of the village envelope. On Nether Hill, which leads to Belsham St Water. It is set within a row of dwellings, which within plots of different widths and a mix of traditional designs, as I've just said. However, there is a clear established building line. The application site originally formed part of the garden of K9 Cottage, with outline permission being granted last year. The dwelling would be closer to the boundary shared with Hillcrest, as shown here, than it is with K9 Cottage. However, there is a gap of 1 metre to the boundary and an intervening single-storey building on the other side of the wall, which will assist in providing a sense of separation between the existing and the new dwellings. The conformity of the existing building line and the adequate separation distances will also ensure that overshadowing to an unacceptable degree is unlikely to occur. There are also no side windows at first floor on the elevation facing site K9 Cottage, and those facing Hillcrest would be obscure glazed to the bathroom and WC and to light the staircase, which is not a habitable room. The proposed dwelling would be traditional in form of a simple design which is reflective of the properties in the immediate vicinity. It would measure approximately 6.8 metres in height, 7 metres in width and 10 metres in depth, and would utilise the existing access. With regard to the concerns raised over development, ridge heights and overlooking and overshadowing, it is noted that the dwelling would be slightly higher than the dwellings either side, being 0.6 metres above Hillcrest and 0.7 metres above K9 Cottage. The height is similar to that, however, of the newly constructed dwelling further north adjacent to Boulders, which was allowed on appeal. And while steeper than the adjacent dwelling, this dwelling would be largely concealed from views, particularly by the barn at Hillcrest, as illustrated on this site plan here. In terms of the scale and design of the dwelling, officers are satisfied that it is acceptable and would not make the dwelling appear unduly dominant or incongruous in relation to the existing context or the new dwelling to the north of the site. In terms of concerns raised regarding foundations, I have sought advice from building control and would advise this aspect of the proposal is a purely civil matter. The house will be positioned as per the plans if approved, and there is no hard and fast rule as to how close foundations can go to an existing structure, as this is a matter which would have to be assessed at the time the foundations are dug. Any problems that may arise would be the responsibility of the applicant or developer. Sorry, that's the first and ground floor plans there for you, 3 bedrooms and kitchen, family room, lounge, study on the ground floor. In terms of parking, the proposed cart lodge at the rear will straddle the boundary of K9 Cottage and the new dwelling with 1 space each, and future use limited by condition. It should be noted that there is a visibility display condition imposed on the outline application, and although I note the concerns of the Parish Council, Essex County Highways have not objected to the proposal. In response to the Parish Council's concerns regarding the use of block paving and the general sort of urbanisation appearance, the amount of hard standing has been reduced with landscaping incorporating more lawn and low hedging to the front boundary. The boundary between K9 Cottage and the new dwelling will be delineated with a 1.8 metre close boarded fence as shown on this plan here. As stated in the report, 2 unprotected trees have already been removed. However, the rear boundaries of this row of houses are relatively open, so although regrettable, it is concluded that this has not resulted in any harm. Going back, show you some photographs of the site. This is the actual frontage of the site here. That's showing open countryside to the opposite. That is K9 Cottage here, and the 2 existing dwellings here, and where you can see the scaffolding to the north, that is where the new dwelling is being constructed adjacent to Boulders. I've put this up to show you a site plan, an elevation of the new dwelling adjacent to Boulders to indicate and show you that there is a difference in height between the 2. So although the new dwelling is slightly higher than the dwellings either side, it's only very slight, and it's mirroring really the dwelling that has been allowed on appeal. And that is Hillcrest and the barn. So in conclusion, I would point out the site has the benefit of outline planning permission for the erection of a single dwelling on the plot with all matters reserved. The proposed dwelling would allow enough circulation space around it and be of an appropriate size and design to appear proportionate to the size of the site and to respond to the neighbouring development. Officers are satisfied that proposed development is acceptable in respect of scale, appearance and layout. Vehicular access onto the site is considered acceptable, subject to conditions attached to the outline consent, and the parking arrangements have been deemed as acceptable by the Highway Authority. Officers are satisfied that the proposed landscaping of the site is acceptable and recommend that this application for reserved matters is granted planning permission. Thank you. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Natalie. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Members. No one's interested in this.
I bored them to death.
You've bored them to death. I don't think so. No. Councillor Mrs. Parker.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I actually know this road really well, and I quickly drove up there today to refresh my mind. It is actually on the, probably the name Hillcrest will give you a view of what it's like, but it is actually on the top of a hill, and you can see it from quite a long way, the road from Bulmer, and also from some of the public rights of way that go behind the site. But I mean, I think we are here in a situation where outline planning permission has been granted for the site. I do accept the parish council's view that it was quite difficult for them to make a view on an outline planning permission without actually seeing what's proposed. So I think that they do have a point there, but then obviously we have to deal with planning applications as they come in. And I also do accept the point that it is actually a very small site. Having said that, I do think this is a very modest dwelling, and I'm not sure you can make it much smaller. So I don't really have a serious problem with that. I also don't have a problem with the height, which I think, given the grant of permission for boulders, I think it will fit in with the dwellings on there, which are varied actually. My only question really was, there's red brick and there's red brick, and the neighbouring property, Canine Cottage, has got lovely soft red bricks, and I was wondering whether it would be appropriate to have a materials condition on so that we can see what kind of brick is being proposed, because I would hate it to be a really sort of, well, a suburban kind of brick. Madam Chairman, would the officers think that be appropriate?
Natalie, would you like to come back on that one, please?
Yes, I believe Chris would like to speak on this issue, if you don't mind.
Right, okay. Good evening, Chris. Would you like to speak on this? I can't see you at the moment.
Apologies, Madam Chairman. I was just struggling to find my on the video button. There we go. Yes, thank you, Councillor Parker. Just in terms of the point, so we've got condition 5 on the recommended agenda, which requires samples of materials to be submitted. I absolutely appreciate the point that's being made, because actually when you look along the road itself, there are some lovely properties along there, and as you say, there is a big difference between a nice traditional soft red brick and a much more modern wire cut brick that could be used and might be more appropriate in a more suburban urban area. So I think we've got the comforts with the condition that we have the control over the external appearance, and obviously sympathise with the concerns that have been raised by the parish council as well about the appearance. I think the brick will substantially help in terms of the appearance of the property, and if members felt very strongly on this particular point, we could always add an additional informative to the decision around the use of that brick to try to reflect some of the colour and the patination of some of the adjacent properties, because it isn't just a single colour of a brick of the adjacent ones. There is it's a mix of different reds, which would be a traditional mix of red brick. So we could potentially try to secure something similar for the new dwelling in this location. And as I said, if members felt strongly, we could add an informative to that, to any decision to advise the developer, the applicant, that was what we would expect in discharging that condition. So hopefully those comments are of some use, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Chris. Councillor Mrs. Parker, I mean, would you be quite satisfied with an informative to say that we wish to see the brick to see if it blends with the existing houses?
Yes, I would, Madam Chairman. Sorry, I didn't spot the condition. It was already there, wasn't it? So, but yes, I think that would be helpful for everybody, and the applicant in particular. So I would love that informative. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs. Spray.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I don't know if did Councillor Parker move?
No.
Approval. Right. Well, I will, in that case. I do agree with all her comments, particularly pleased to have an informative around the materials, which I think is sensible. I do think for me the design is perfectly acceptable. It's quite modest. Yes, there's a height difference, but it's minimal, really. It certainly, I don't think, would be enough to excite the attention of an inspector at an appeal. And if you were to make a building on there, a dwelling on there, any smaller, it would adversely affect the amenities of occupiers. So I think, you know, I accept it's not the biggest site we've ever seen, but I don't think it's inappropriate for that dwelling to be on there. I think it's acceptable within planning terms. So yeah, I'm happy to second. No, I'll move. Sorry, officer's recommendation for approval with the additional informative regarding the materials. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs. Spray. Does it find a seconder, please?
Happy to second, Madam Chairman. Councillor Ritchie.
Thank you, Councillor Ritchie. Did you wish to speak?
Just very briefly, Madam Chairman, I agree with all the previous comments. I think the informative just shows a bit of due diligence by us and just ensuring that it does have some consistency with the street scene. And on size and scale, I think it's kind of as perfect as you're going to get. It's not overbearing and it's not undersized for what the applicant's needs are for. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Ritchie. I have no one else wishing to speak on this item. It has been moved by Councillor Mrs. Spray, seconded by Councillor Ritchie with the informative regarding the brick to blend with existing properties, and we would see the sample. I'm going, and it's up for approval. I'm going to go to the vote. That's Councillor Bowers.
For.
Councillor Horner.
For.
Councillor Johnson.
For approval.
Councillor Mann.
For approval.
Councillor Mrs. Parker.
For.
Councillor Ritchie.
For.
Councillor Mrs. Spray.
For.
And Councillor Wrench.
For.
Thank you, members. That has also been agreed unanimously. And thank you very much, Councillor Smith, for attending and speaking at our meeting. Thank you. That brings us on to the last application on our agenda this evening, and that's application 5F, application 20022314, Co-op 1-2 St John's Terrace, Brook Street, Great Bardfield. I do not have any speakers on this application, so I'll go straight to the presentation, which is going to be made by Lisa. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Okay, this is a full planning application for the change of use of number 2 and the first floor of number 1, St John's Terrace, from residential use to retail, and the erection of a single-storey extension, alterations to the shop front, proposed plant yard area and associated works, including the demolition of an existing outbuilding. And the site address is the Co-op, which is 1-2 St John's Terrace, Brook Street in Great Bardfield. The application is being reported to committee in accordance with the transitionary arrangements for the council's new scheme of delegation, as Great Bardfield Parish Council object to some elements of the proposal contrary to officer recommendation. So turning to the location plan here, the site is located centrally within the village of Great Bardfield. It lies on the northern side of Brook Street, and it is within the defined settlement boundary of the village. The application site comprises 1 St John's Terrace, which is a local convenience store, as we know, which is the Co-op at ground floor, which has a flat at first floor. And this application site also includes number 2 St John's Terrace here, which is a 2-storey dwelling house. Looking at the wider area, the properties that adjoin the site comprise of residential. So this property, number 1 and number 2, are not listed, but the site is located within the conservation area. Looking at the existing site plan here, you can see number 2, St John's Terrace, which is the residential dwelling. So residential at ground floor and their private garden area. You've got the co-op building here. So this light greeny colour is the retail outlet, the retail sort of element. You can see the single access door here from Brook Street, and the back here is your back of house. In terms of the existing first floor, again, in terms of 2 St John's Terrace, you've got the first floor accommodation for this residential dwelling. And at first floor here above the co-op, you can see accessed via the side access. And this staircase is a 3-bed flat. So turning to the proposed ground floor, the application incorporates all of number 2, which was the former dwelling house, to provide retail opportunity for the co-op. The changes in terms of the co-op access here, you can see that it's gone from a single door to a double door here, and the retail offer has been pushed back further into the site. Here is an extension. So it's a relatively modest extension, around 21 metres squared, to extend the sales area. In terms of the proposed first floor, this former number 2 St John's Terrace, the residential, you can see has been knocked through to create this entire first floor, which is all for back of house area for the co-op. Turning to the existing elevations here, you can see, not very clearly, I apologise. So this is the existing flank elevation and this is the proposed. That 21 metre squared extension is coming here. You can see that a little bit clearer on this this northern elevation here. So this is the existing and this is the proposed. So it's this flat roof extension that's sort of coming off here. So although officers consider that the flat roof isn't in keeping with the existing form of the building, on balance it's considered appropriate because it is subservient and it's discreetly sited. It would have a neutral impact on the significance of the conservation area. And because matching materials are proposed, it would help to sort of assimilate that into the existing building. So turning to the south elevation, these plans show the frontage of the site and the changes to the shop front. Turning to number 2 firstly, so as existing, as proposed. So number 2 you can see does not alter in terms of that street scene elevation. So it still appears as a residential unit. So although the reconfiguration results in the loss of number 2, because the front door is retained and the windows, it still has that legibility in terms of the run of 5. And then looking at the shop front elevations here, so existing and proposed, we can see that it's gone from a single access door to a double, and some slight changes here in terms of the windows. So as existing, it's not considered to have any architectural value. The existing shop windows here are to be refurbished and repainted in a dark grey, whereas the central shop front entrance will be altered from the single auto swing door to this double auto swing door constructed in timber. Some photographs here, I apologise, they're a little bit blurry, but this sort of just shows the context of the co-op really in terms of that run of 5. Again, you can see that sort of just looking at the property head on here. So here is number 2 St John's. So that unit, which is currently in residential, would be lost to commercial, but in terms of the impact on the street scene, there would be no change. Some photos here, it's quite difficult to get some photos of the rear service yard, but this is where the extension would come off. So it's coming off this building. There is a quick update to members, 2 points really, relating firstly to plan number change. So the proposed ground floor should actually be revision J and not H. So we're asking just for that to be clarified and altered on the decision notice. And the proposed first floor is revision G and not revision 6, which I think is a bit of a typo there. And also a change to condition 5, which relates to noise. So it's just a bit of clarification really to say that this particular condition is relating to the nighttime period. So where I've added in bold during the nighttime period of 23 to 7 o'clock, that's what we're seeking to add to that condition 5. And because of this change up here in terms of the ground floor, so revision J and not H, it also requires a change to condition 8, which refers to a particular plan number and that sort of previous garden area for number 2. So just seeking a change to condition 5 here and condition 8. So in terms of a summary and the planning balance, the site lies within an identified village boundary where the principle of development is supported. It would retain and enhance existing local shop, allowing expansion to increase the fuller convenience offer, and positive weight is assigned to the social and economic sustainability of this development. The shopfront changes will have a neutral impact on the character and appearance of the host building, the street scene, and the character and appearance of the conservation area, and there would be no harm in terms of heritage impacts. The loss of the 2 residential units raises no objection in policy terms, and other planning considerations in regards to ecology, amenity of neighbouring neighbours, and highway matters are acceptable. And recommendation tonight is that planning permission is granted. And that's the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lisa. Thank you. Business is booming in Great Barfield. Members. Councillor Mrs. Spray.
Thank you, Chairman. I think I've just got in before Councillor Ritchie, so I'll start. Yeah, I think there are a lot of positives about this in terms of improving the retail offer for what is obviously a I think quite a popular and well used local store. Will improve their trading ability and also the appearance of it. I've taken on board the concerns about the property, the small property next door being converted to retail, but I think there's a comment in the agenda, page 118 from the officer, that actually it's a very small property. It wouldn't meet, or it doesn't meet today's standards in terms of, I think, room size and amenity space. So yes, all right, you're losing a dwelling, but I think what you're gaining in terms of trading space for the store is more than acceptable, and that the frontage will, I think, be spruced up, but will stay the same. So all in all, I think this is more than acceptable. Quite a positive move, actually. So I'm happy to move officer's recommendation for approval. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs. Spray. And that was with the plan number changes noted and the change to condition 5 and the change to condition 8, yes?
Yes, indeed. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Ritchie, and you wish to speak now. I'll go straight to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Absolutely fine to second this proposal with the amendments as per Lisa's report. Not to labour the points that Councillor Spray made, but I think there's a clever use of the expansion whilst keeping the street scene looking exactly the same, with the facade of it still appearing to be a residential dwelling. I think village shops like this are the lifeblood and actually have proven their worth, particularly over the past year. And give villagers somewhere to shop locally without having to go too far. And I think by extending what I think is more than a reasonable extension here, it just increases that customer proposition. I know it's a very popular store. I think it probably attracts custom from some of the smaller outlying villages close to Great Barfield also. So more than happy to second this recommendation. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Ritchie. Councillor Mann.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I was saying before the meeting that I've, in times past, actually been in this store, and it would be correct to say that it is small and restricted. So clearly, you're enhancing a community asset in this proposal. I understand where the parish council is coming from. You don't like losing small units of accommodation in a highly priced village, but I'm convinced myself that the advantage of the enhanced facility outweighs the loss of housing. So happy to support, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Mann. I have no one else indicating they wish to speak on this item. It has been moved by Councillor Mrs. Spray, seconded by Councillor Ritchie, having noted the plan number changes, the change to condition 5 and the change to condition 8. That is what I'm going to put to the members, and that is for approval with those changes to the conditions. Councillor Bowers.
For.
Councillor Horner.
For.
Councillor Johnson.
For approval.
Councillor Mann.
For approval.
Councillor Mrs. Parker.
For.
Councillor Ritchie.
For.
Councillor Mrs. Spray.
For.
And Councillor Wrench.
For.
Thank you, members. That application has been approved unanimously. And that brings us to the end of our planning items. It also brings us to the end of our final meeting in this civic year. A year like no other, I think. But I think we did master Teams and Zoom quite quickly. And on the whole, I think meetings went quite well. And I would like, before I go, to thank you all. I'd like to thank all the members of the planning team. And I'd like to thank the governance team for their help. And I also like to thank the people in the background who've made these meetings possible. And we've all worked quite hard on this. I know I've made a few errors, but I've got through most of them. It is quite daunting doing it this way, and I can't wait to get back so we're all in one room again. I do like to actually see your faces. I get more feeling as to where you're all going to be coming from. But I'll thank you for all your work in the last year and say good night, and I will close the meeting at 21:18. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Before we ask the webcasting officer to terminate the broadcast on the Council's YouTube channel, please can I remind members that we will obtain performance data relating to your connection to this meeting this evening. This is going to be held just in case we have a legal challenge to the way we've held this meeting this evening. Webcasting officer, please can you terminate the broadcast on the YouTube channel? Thank you.